My name is Vicki Pretlow, a program specialist within the Division of Energy Assistance. On behalf of the Office of Community Services, Division of Energy Assistance, I'd like to welcome you all to the fiscal year 2025 LIHEAP Model Plan Training webinar. We are happy that you're able to join us today and hope that the information we share will provide valuable tools as you enter into the development phase of your fiscal year 2025 model plan. As you can see, we have a packed agenda today, and we're going to follow it as it's presented here. We'll start with a welcome from Megan Meadows, Division of Energy Assistance Director, after which we invite you to watch her converse with Akam Rahman, the Program Operations Branch Chief, as they engage in a conversation to highlight what's new for fiscal year 2025. We'll forward up with some information about assurances, and we'll do a brief overview of the annual model plan process and timeline. We'll follow that with a highlight of some important points with regard to public participation, get into the delegation process, and talk a little bit about benefit structure. After which, we'll turn our focus to performance management, some optional sections that you can include in your model plan if you so choose. We'll pinpoint some exceptions for our tribal grant recipients, and then we'll end the presentation portion of the webinar with a discussion on some of the fiscal controls that are important to have as components of your program. Finally, we'll wrap up the webinar with a question and answer session, so get your questions ready and feel free to enter them into the Q&A box throughout the course of the webinar. If we're not able to answer your question either via the Q&A box in real time or during the Q&A session, we'll be sure to follow up with a response after the close of the webinar. Before we move ahead to the discussion of the model plan changes, I'd like to take this time to mention two high-level points to be mindful of as you're developing your plan. First, in some cases, we've noticed that grant recipients refer to themselves differently throughout their model plan. We ask that in the OLDC system and throughout the plan itself, you refer to your program in a more standardized way. Preferably, you would refer to yourself as quote unquote state of, and then your state's name, or use the tribal name as it's listed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And then secondly, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask that as you're building your plan, you remove any old attachments from the previous year. If you clone your plan, those old documents transfer over and cause a cluttered view in some cases. To ensure the efficient review of your plan, it would be very helpful to only include relevant documents to the year of the model plan in development. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Again, we'll start with a welcome from Megan and then get into what's new with our model plan for the upcoming fiscal year 2025 program. Megan?
Thanks so much, Vicki, and hello, everyone. I want to take a moment today to say welcome to the LIHEAP Model Plan Training webinar. I truly appreciate everyone taking the time out of your very busy schedule to listen in and prepare to submit your LIHEAP Model Plan. I hope that the topics we cover today are helpful, and in addition to the resource guide, the model plan template, and the action transmittal we issued earlier this month. We'll try to address, as Vicki said, any of the questions that are submitted during today's webinar, but please don't hesitate to reach out to me or anyone on our team if you have questions throughout your plan development process. We're here to help. Thanks again for listening in, and with that, I will turn it over to Akam.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Good afternoon and good morning to our West Coast partners. Megan and I will go through a few questions for everyone to understand what type of changes we have made to the model plan this year. First of all, Megan, it's great that you could join me for a few minutes to discuss our priorities around the fiscal year 2025 grant application process. Could you talk a little bit about what prompted us to make these enhancements to the model plan form this year?
Yeah, thanks so much, Akam. And I am really excited to talk about the enhancements that were made to the plan. When we think about what modifications to make, we take a look at the ongoing feedback that we receive from our grant recipients on a daily basis. What were the questions that we can hold up on approving a model plan? And lastly, what type of questions we are asked by our partners about the program implementation. We are also very mindful of the questions that did not demonstrate how the program was administered in accordance with the statute so that we could remove those questions from the model plan. So our ultimate goal was to have a LIHEAP model plan that adhered to the regulatory requirements and also a plan that was an opportunity for recipients to describe how they utilize the LIHEAP block grant funds to serve those households in need. So I hope that the changes that we made in the LIHEAP model plan this year accomplish those goals. And as I mentioned earlier, we appreciate the ongoing feedback from grant recipients about what has worked, what was helpful in your administration, and what we can continually do to improve our processes. Akam, I'm going to ask you a question about the model plan process. And so if you could talk about any major areas you'd like to highlight as updates to our model plan as compared to last year.
So, sorry, thank you so much. Yes, Megan, there are a few things that I can mention. First of all, there are some overarching changes to the model plan form. You will notice, and our grant recipients will notice that there are many text boxes next to a response for giving everyone an opportunity to provide us with additional explanations. So that change is carried over throughout the model plan form. Going back to the very first section, which is the SF424, we added some clarifications for our tribal grant recipients, especially the ones that are a consortium. Consortiums is an organization that apply funding on behalf of their group tribal members. So in this case, if someone is applying, if a tribal organization is applying as a consortium, we are asking for some additional documentations, and the examples are listed there. Also, another important change this year, over the years, we have learned that our grant recipients don't necessarily run a year-round crisis program. There are summer crisis programs, there are winter crisis programs, in addition to a year-round crisis program. So throughout the form where the crisis program is mentioned, our grant recipients will see that they are grouped into these three different categories rather than just one type of crisis. And finally, this is also an overarching change. Our grant recipients and all of us, we know that there were some opportunities for us to explain categorical eligibility application process, especially asking some additional questions to improve customer experience. We added some clarity around weatherization and solar, public input, impact of Assurance 16 activities, fiscal controls. So our speakers will talk about these things in a little bit more in depth in a few minutes. And then finally, our grant recipient will see that we have added some additional attachments. They are not necessarily all are required, but we strongly encourage our grant recipients to share their attachments where asked. I'm sure I missed one or two, but thank you, Megan. But it's my turn to ask you a question. Can you talk a little bit about the public input process? I understand that OCS received some very valuable comments from our network, so I'd like to talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Vicki, you can go ahead and transition to the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we take the feedback we receive from grant recipients very seriously. And while we don't always receive consistent feedback from everyone, as everyone's situations and experience is different, we need this feedback in order to find the balance to provide forms that address a variety of needs. So based on the feedback received on an ongoing basis and based on our experience in reviewing the plans, we began drafting the changes. We were working to ensure we were removing items not necessary, clarifying questions that seemed to cause confusion, and adding questions that would be helpful to better understand how the program is administered and ensure that all of those assurances are that AICM's going to talk about in a little bit are met. So once this first internal draft of the changes on the document are done, we begin this process of the Public Paperwork Reduction Act process, where we submit this information to our partners in the Office of Management and Budget, and they begin this process. So the process in general allows for a 60-day comment period and a 30-day public comment period. So these open comment periods are the opportunity to provide very specific feedback on the draft changes that we are proposing. So just so folks are aware that, you know, we aren't able to send out sort of an informal request for feedback to the network. So we truly rely on this open public process to receive feedback during the time so that we can make any additional edits needed to the forms. So we received comments during the 60-day period and the 30-day period that we were able to address and make some additional changes. So some questions we were able to modify to ensure that they were clear, and some requests we didn't change, but also provided the rationale for why that change did or did not occur to our partners at OBM. So we really do appreciate everyone taking the time to review those draft documents, the folks that provided that meaningful feedback to us. And again, we appreciate kind of that ongoing feedback so that we can ensure we are continually working to improve our program implementation. So on the screen here is the example of the Dear Colleague letter that we sent out that sort of kicked off that 60-day comment period, and then followed up with an email regarding the 30-day comment period. And then I also wanted to show folks specifically the posting for the Federal Registered Notice through our partners at OBM, so that you would have this sort of awareness of what our public participation process looks like on our end, and truly understand that it is really important for us to receive feedback from you all so that you're ready for when our additional forms come through that we need to go through the process. So thanks again for your feedback and for your ongoing communication on ways that we can improve our implementation so that ultimately you can improve your implementation and serve those households in need in your community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to AICM to keep going with today's presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. This great response. Vicki, if we could move to the next slide. Thank you so much. Assurances. I am going to keep my camera on for a little bit and talk just a little bit about assurances and also the model plan review process, as Vicki mentioned at the beginning. Assurances are one of the most formal way you tell us that you are going to follow those 16 assurances in addition to all the requirements that are laid out in the LIHEAP statute, in the in the regulations, whatnot. But the most important thing about assurances is that we view this as boundaries within which program design and innovation can occur. So I will give you some examples in a minute. So basically these boundaries are, you could call it fence posts, you could call it as parameters within which each grant recipient can design their program based on their local needs and priorities. But what it means to provide assurances to HHS or federal government, you hear this all the time, that HHS wants you to provide LIHEAP assurances to our office. It simply means that that we want in writing from your chief executive officer. So if you're a state, the assurance will come from your governor. And then it can be delegated to the LIHEAP office. We will take a deeper dive on this topic a little bit later. And if you're a tribal grant recipient, that assurance must come from your tribal chief or the head of the tribal government. For territories, it could be a governor or it could be a commissioner. But the point is that we need that formal assurance from your office in order for us to process the LIHEAP application. Next slide, please. So this slide, I'm not going to talk about this couple of slides. So we're going to quickly skip through this slide, which is slide 8, I believe, and slide 9. We developed those two slides to show you what those 16 assurances are. So here are some examples that I wanted to talk to you about. As you can see that on this slide, we grouped these assurances, not all 16 of them because of time constraint, but a few of them. So for example, assurance 1, 4, and 3, if you take a deeper dive into the text of these assurances, you can see that assurance 1 gives flexibility to our grant recipient to design their own heating, cooling, or weatherization assistance program. They can decide based on their local needs, whether they should run a heating assistance program, a cooling assistance, or both, or weatherization as well. So these are some of the decisions that are left on the grant recipients. Assurance 4 and 3, for example, it talks about coordination of services with like programs, also outreach to priority populations. For example, you all know that a significant number of LIHEAP recipients come from vulnerable population. There are older individuals, there are households with young kids. So this assurance allows our grant recipient to design their program to give priority in their outreach effort. Eligibility, for example, assurance 2, it talks about how the income range can vary anywhere between 150% of federal poverty guideline to all the way up to the 60% of SMI, and actually whichever is greater. For example, Assurance 5 talks about benefit maximization. It allows grant recipient to design their matrix based on their local needs, and then 3 factors that is mentioned in our statute. Again, there is no federal maximum on the benefit, but there is a requirement to make sure that our grant recipients design their matrix in a way so that they can provide maximum possible benefit to household with lowest income. I'm going to skip 12 and 13 and go to the next slide. One more. Thank you. So this slide, this one and the next one actually was designed to show you the connection between our own preparation, your preparation as a grant recipient, and then what happens once you submit the plan to our office. In other words, our internal process. The most important thing here is that a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is the deadline. You will notice that this year we moved the deadline to September 3rd because of a holiday, Labor Day holiday, and then also September 1st fell on a Sunday this year. Please stick to the deadline. If you need an extension, although it's not encouraged, please submit that in writing way ahead of time. If you're a tribal grant recipient, I ask that you contact your state counterpart, your state LIHEAP director, get some concurrence about your extension request, and then submit the extension request to our office. But again, if you submit early, earlier the better, because as soon as we have your model plan in OLDC, our reviewers will start reviewing them. And the other important point is that we cannot release funding unless your model plan is accepted in OLDC. So that's a very important thing. That's why we start early. As you can see, in January through March, we had conversation and reminders with our grant recipients during the regional calls. We published the action transmittal this year in April. What is unique this year is that with the action transmittal, we were able to revise our resource guide for our grant recipient based on the changes we made in the model plan. And then also we released a Word document of the model plan form so that our grant recipient can start early, so that they can draft the model plan, put it through their review and approval process, and use the same model plan for the public input process. During May and August, we are asking our grant recipient to prepare a calendar of events so that it can smoothly go through your own internal review process, and then obviously you can submit that on time to our office. And between September and October 15, that's a huge target date for us. We would like to review and approve or accept all of our model plan by October 15th. So we're going to be a little bit of aggressive on responding back to you as soon as we review them. Can we move to the next slide? Yes. So one thing I wanted to explain here is that how the internal process works, so that you all can understand what the expectations are. So once the model plan is submitted to our office, we review them right away. And there could be two possible outcomes. One is we accept the plan as is. So it's a wonderful plan. And believe me, it happens. A lot of plans are accepted in the first round. So accepted means that plan is ready, and we are going to recommend that state, tribe, or territory for funding when the funding release time comes. The other outcome, obviously, is not a happy outcome, but you might get a rejection notice from OLDC, from the reviewer. You might have just one deadline says that you must address these items within this deadline, which could be a very short deadline. And I argue that that short deadline means that these items that our reviewer is rejecting is tied with funding release. So you must address those without any delay. The other possible outcome could be you receiving a model plan back from our office with two different deadlines. One is an immediate deadline, like next week. Another one could be two weeks down the road. So we would like you to address both deadlines, but we wanted to explain to you that the first deadline is the key deadline for you to receive funding. We can release funding with some pending items. However, we cannot release funding with any items that were listed in the first deadline. And then obviously between October and early November, if you look at our funding release dates, we have been releasing funding thanks to our funding release partners, and thank you to all who submit their model plan on time. Between October and November, we should be ready and releasing funding to our grant recipient. The one clarification here is that we are not emailing you your award letters anymore. Once funding is ready, you should be able to view and download a copy of your notice of award from Grant Solution. And at the same time, you should be able to draw down your money, the funding that you need from the payment management system. Next slide. I think that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm going to hand over to Doris.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Doris Callejas, and I am a program specialist with the Division of Energy Assistance. And today I will go into more details on Assurance 12, public participation, or Section 11 of the model plan. But before I do that, I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, please jot them down into the Q&A box so that we can take care of those at the end of the presentation. So one of the most important assurances when it comes to the development of the model plan is Assurance 12. This assurance states grantees must provide for timely and meaningful public participation in the development of the model plan. What this means is that a grant recipient is meeting Assurance 12 by giving the general public an opportunity to comment and provide feedback on the development of the model plan each fiscal year. This can be accomplished by holding a public hearing where the model plan is presented to the members of the general public, and the public is asked to provide feedback. Another option is engaging local agencies and our major stakeholders in helping to consider new policies and develop revisions to the previous year's model plan. Next slide, please. All the grant recipients are required to provide evidence of how meaningful public participation input in the development of the model plan was acquired. Evidence of how you're meeting this assurance must be documented in Section 11 of the model plan, as shown in this slide here, and attached to the model plan. If we do not see an attachment on how you're meeting this assurance, your plan will be rejected, as Aiton mentioned. And SAMICs, please note that as stated in question 11.1, tribes are not required to hold a public hearing, but timely and meaningful public input in the development of the model plan is still a requirement. Some examples of how a tribe can obtain public input include going over the drafted plan at tribal council meeting, posting the plan on the website and making it available for comment, presenting the plan to existing stakeholder groups like advisory committees, holding listening sessions at different locations, allowing alternative forms of feedback, for example, email, public webinars, online forums, and having community meetings in underserved locations, etc. Meaningful public input or participation is very important. So for states, if you're holding a public hearing and no one is attending those hearings or providing feedback on the webinar, it is important for you to consider incorporating other means of obtaining feedback like the ones I just mentioned. Also, please provide ample time for feedback. Holding a hearing just a few days before the model plan is due will not give you ample time to review those comments and try to incorporate those changes. I suggest that, this is the time for you to start scheduling those public hearings so that you can have it in May or June, or posting the drafted model plan on your website. All right, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Nancy, who will go over the next section.
Thank you, Doris. And hello, I'm Nancy Stevens. I am a LIHEAP program specialist. Regarding delegation letters, every LIHEAP plan, as most of you probably know, must be signed, certified, and submitted in OLDC before it can be reviewed by our office and accepted for LIHEAP funding. Please remember that signing, certifying, and submitting the plan must be done by someone who has an OLDC account, and that account should be set up to include the ability to sign, certify, and submit reports. So, for example, not all OLDC accounts will include this access. You may need to contact Grant Solutions to make sure that the person in your agency that will sign, certify, and submit the plan has an account that will allow them the necessary access to sign, certify, and submit the plan. We suggest contacting Grant Solutions sooner rather than later, like now is a good time to set up the necessary account access, because Grant Solutions may become busy closer to the plan submission due date, and there may be delays in processing requests. So for states and territories, the governor is the only person authorized to sign, certify, and submit your plan. For tribes, it is the tribal chairperson that is the only person that is authorized to sign, certify, and submit your plan. However, we realize that it is not always feasible to have your state or territory's governor or your tribe's tribal chairperson submit your LIHEAP plan. In these cases, you can have your governor or tribal chairperson sign a delegation letter. The delegation letter gives the governor or tribal chairperson's authority to sign, certify, and submit the LIHEAP plan to someone in your agency who does have an OLDC account and will submit the plan in OLDC. Next slide, please. This slide includes a sample delegation letter template of the content that you should include in the delegation letter. Please note that the text that's in brackets is where you will update information that is specific to your state, territory, or tribe. You can contact your LIHEAP program specialist at any time for a copy of this delegation letter template. Next slide, please. One note about delegation letters: you can use what we call a chain of delegation letters if it's needed. The chain of delegation letters works like this. You can have the appropriate governor, or tribal chairperson sign an initial delegation letter granting authority to someone in your agency, like the head of your agency or the head of your department. This person may not be the person who will submit the plan in OLDC, but they may be more accessible in case the person who is intended to submit the plan in OLDC leaves your agency or isn't available when it is time to submit the plan. In this case, you will only have to return to the head of the agency or the head of the department to have a new delegation letter signed, instead of having to return all the way back to the governor or tribal chairperson's office. Next slide, please. If you will need to submit a delegation letter for tribes, please do not use a standard tribal resolution that gives authority to a tribal vice chairman. please do not use that as your delegation letter. Also, please do not specify the fiscal year in your delegation letter. You can date your letter, but please don't include a fiscal year for when the delegation letter applies. This will prevent you from using the letter in the future if the signer and delegated person do remain the same. Please do not submit an incorrectly signed delegation letter because we will have to return your LIHEAP plan, which may cause a delay in you receiving your fiscal year 2025 LIHEAP funding award. Next slide, please. Please do make sure that the delegation letter is signed correctly. For states and territories, the letter should be signed by your current governor. For tribes, the letter should be signed by the tribal chairperson. The only exception to this is if you are a tribal consortium, you can have your executive director or head of the consortium sign the delegation letter. If you want to check to be sure that the delegation letter is signed correctly, please do feel free to check the websites that our office uses to verify grant recipients' governor or tribal chairperson. For states and territories, it's the National Governors Association website. And for tribes, we check the Bureau of Indian Affairs Tribal Leadership Directory. I will paste links to these organizations in the chat box in just a moment. Once you have your delegation letter correctly signed, please do attach the letter in OLDC when you submit your fiscal year 2025 LIHEAP model plan. Next, we will discuss the benefit matrix.
Thank you so much, Nancy. So as Nancy just stated, we'll be discussing the benefit matrix next. The content that we will be covering includes the purpose of your benefit matrix, components that you should be including in your benefit matrix, as well as reviewing a sample benefit matrix. I will be reviewing the first portion and then I will pass it off to Vicki. So starting with discussing the purpose of your benefit matrix, when you're creating your benefit matrix, these are some of the main purposes that you should have in mind. So our first bullet includes a portion of the LIHEAP statute. So we wrote an OCS approved benefit matrix assures compliance with the federal LIHEAP statute, section 2605B5. Grant recipients must, quote, provide in a timely manner that the highest level of energy assistance will be furnished to those households that have the lowest incomes and the highest energy costs or needs in relation to income, taking into account family size. So this begins to establish some of the components that will be included in your benefit matrix, which Vicki will be describing in more detail on the next slide. A benefit matrix can also improve the effectiveness and efficiency of your LIHEAP program administration. For example, benefit amounts should be transparent within the matrix. When households, leaders, or the public inquire into benefit levels, an established matrix can supply rationale as well as justification. The benefit matrix also makes the benefit determination process fair. When a matrix is in place, households can see that the benefit determination criteria are used among all applicants. It also ensures that benefits are equitable. When a benefit matrix is not in place, grant recipients tend to pay the current bill. In some cases, this can end up penalizing households who have kept their bills current and reward those who haven't. It can also assist with targeting outreach. A benefit matrix can award higher benefits, or sometimes referred to as points in some benefit matrices, to specific vulnerable populations. As mentioned earlier, this typically includes households with older adults, individuals with disabilities, or young children. Additionally, grant recipients can also further define how they identify vulnerable households. Benefits can also be easily adjusted or targeted. When a grant recipient has unspent or overspent funds, the benefit matrix provides a straightforward avenue to alter spending during the year or in subsequent years as well. Also, this was implied in some of the previous points that I mentioned, but please remember that model plans are viewable by the general public. So while benefit matrices should of course be clearly understood by federal, state, territorial, tribal, and local LIHEAP staff, OCS also suggests that benefit matrices are made to be clear enough that even members of the general public can understand them. That way, applicants can easily have an estimate of what their benefit level could potentially be prior to receiving a determination when applying to LIHEAP. Also, it's important that you keep this suggested purpose in mind, as well as the rest that I discussed as you create your benefit matrix. And now I'll be passing it off to Vicky to discuss components.
Thanks, Francesca. So now we'll talk a little bit about the components of your benefits matrix. Because LIHEAP is a block grant, there is an opportunity for grant recipients to design a benefit matrix that best meets the needs and/or priorities within the communities where they work. However, even though there is a broad flexibility in the design of your benefit matrix, the rule of thumb is that all benefit matrices must be based on at least 3 factors, which should include in some way income, household size, and energy costs or needs. As you will see in the graphic here on this slide, which is a screenshot from the model plan in OLDC, the energy cost factor could be a number of things, which might include such items as fuel type, which is very commonly used, individual bill, which is also commonly used, dwelling type factors, energy burden level, or other factors that are specific to your needs. Grant recipients also have the ability to use their benefits matrix to provide higher benefits to households that have other characteristics present, which might include households with members of a vulnerable population, such as an older adult, a person living with a disability, or families that have young children. There can be other household characteristics, such as the presence of a veteran, an individual with a medical condition, or that the household participates in other social service programs. These are just examples, but it gives a glimpse at the options that some grant recipients choose. Another notable point to highlight is that all benefit matrices should be updated annually to a degree. We realize that the actual structure of your benefit matrix may not change from year to year, but at minimum, the income levels that you use to determine the benefit and to qualify households must be adjusted every year, along with the release of the federal poverty or state median income guidelines. In addition, your matrix should be otherwise regularly reviewed to determine any changes that need to happen based on new data, a shift in your program's design, or to address the needs of clients, which might change over time and could require an adjustment to your benefits matrix to meet those needs. When you submit your annual model plan in OLDC, if after we review it, we find that there are possible issues with your matrix, for instance, it doesn't clearly use 3 factors, that doesn't necessarily prevent us from accepting the plan. The plan reviewer might potentially suggest that you work with your regional liaison to tweak it a bit. However, in the heating and cooling sections of the model plan in OLDC, there is a question that asks the minimum and maximum benefit amounts available. The amounts listed here must be included somewhere on your matrix. If the amounts listed in response to these questions are different than the lowest and highest amounts shown on your matrix, we will not be able to accept the plan until this is corrected. Next, I'm going to provide a sample matrix based on a point system, which is a relatively common method. You'll see here that this matrix includes an explanation sheet that provides information on how to calculate the benefit amount based on income level and household size, utility type, and some other characteristics as well. This piece is a critical addition to any matrix because it makes calculating a benefit understandable for the public. Even if your benefit is calculated in an intake system, there should be some method or documentation by which the public can calculate and understand what their benefit would be, as Francesca mentioned. This is an example of an applicant using the points-based system matrix. where you can see that they are a 4-person household at a certain income level, which gets them 7 points. They use oil as their main heating source, which gets them 6 points. They fall into the housing status category that gets them 3 points. And they also have a young child in the household, which gets them an additional 2 points. Their total is 18 points, which at $25 per point gives them a preliminary benefit of $450. You'll see that this matrix also provides for a base benefit amount of $200. It has an allowance for an added $50 benefit for a secondary utility. And this is a crisis case, which adds an additional $200, bringing the total benefit to $900. So that's a very simple example of a point system matrix, which again is a common structure, but there are many ways to build a matrix, as you might imagine. The key points to remember are that the matrix should be kept up to date in terms of income guidelines, regularly reviewed and tailored to be responsive to needs in the community, and understandable and usable to the public. If you would like to discuss your current benefits matrix and how it could be strengthened to meeting the needs of your communities, please feel free to reach out to your assigned regional liaison. Next, I'll hand it over to Heather Jones to discuss performance management.
Thank you, Vicki. Next slide, please. So section 16 deals with performance management in your model plan. And this section only has to be completed by states. It does not include tribes or territories. So states are to describe their progression towards meeting the data collection reporting requirements for the 4 LIHEAP performance measurements. Those measurements include the benefit targeting index for high burden households, the energy burden reduction index for high burden households, prevention of loss of home energy services, and restoration of home energy services. Next slide, please. States should describe how the following data is collected for all bill-assisted households and used to target energy burden. And this includes collecting annual income, average benefit amounts, annual costs of main heating fuel, and the annual electric cost. Your response should describe how you've obtained data at least from the 5 top heating utilities and the top 10 deliverable fuel providers. And you can provide more than that, but that is the minimum. It will also require that you describe how you gather the annual electrical cost for bill-assisted households that did not receive a LIHEAP benefit for this cost. The prevention of loss in home energy services and restoration of home energy services are the number of occurrences where LIHEAP prevented the termination or restored those services. This includes when utility services, fuels delivery, or heating or cooling equipment is repaired or replaced. This could require you to coordinate with your weatherization program to determine if heating or cooling equipment has been repaired or replaced through that part of the program. You should include timeframes for meeting these requirements and what will be completed in the next federal fiscal year. If you've met these requirements, just please indicate in this section when that was completed and any information you can provide that would assist other grant recipients in meeting these performance management objectives. And now I'm going to turn it to Brianna to talk about optional measures.
Hey everyone, my name is Brianna Hill and I'm a program specialist for the LIHEAP program. I'm going to be covering the optional sections of the model plan, which includes weatherization, assurance 16, as well as the leveraging incentive program. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first section I'm going to be covering is section 5 of the model plan, which is weatherization assistance. Grant recipients have the option to set aside up to 15% of their total fiscal year allocation for low-cost residential weatherization and other energy-related home repair. The maximum allocation can be up to 25% if grant recipient submits and is approved for a waiver. In question 5.5 of the model plan, LIHEAP grant recipients have the option to establish rules governing weatherization services. Grant recipients choosing to use primarily or entirely LIHEAP rules must establish their own quality control, training, inspection, and installation protocols to ensure program integrity and work quality. State grant recipients are allowed to utilize 200% federal poverty level, or FPL, For weatherization, even if it exceeds 60% state median income or SMI, but that is only if they are operating their program entirely under DOE rules or mostly under DOE rules. This is because 200% FPL is the eligibility threshold for DOE weatherization. This year, the model plan will include rooftop solar and community solar projects as a new type of assistance that can be offered in question 5.11 of the model plan. Next slide, please. The next section I will be going over is section 13, which covers assurance 16. Grant recipients have the option to set aside 5% of their total allocation for energy education, energy burden related activities, financial education, disconnection prevention, and self-sufficiency related tasks. There's not one right answer as to how a grant recipient spends their assurance 16 allocation. They should determine what activities would be most beneficial to the communities they're serving. If a grant recipient allocates any of their budget for assurance 16, they must respond to all questions in section 13 of the model plan. However, questions 13.3, 13.4, and 13.5 in this section are referring to the previous fiscal year. If the grant recipient did not operate their assurance 16 initiatives in the prior fiscal year, they should give an NA or not applicable response to these questions. Next slide, please. The final section that I will be going over is section 14, which covers the leveraging incentive program. Grant recipients can set aside up to 0.08% of their total allocation or $35,000, whichever is greater. These funds can be used to identify, develop, and demonstrate non-federal leveraging programs. HHS may provide funding for the leveraging incentive awards each year, and it did so for fiscal years 1991 through 2007, and then again in fiscal years 2009 and 2010, but it has not done so since then. Grant recipients wishing to be considered for a LIHEAP leveraging incentive grant, if announced by HHS, should fill out this section. However, a non-response will not constitute a completeness issue or plan rejection. We do strongly encourage grant recipients to provide information on their efforts to garner non-federal home energy resources, because if HHS does provide funding for this program, only those who leverage non-federal funds and completed this section of the model plan will be eligible to receive funding from the leveraging incentive program. That concludes the optional sections of the model plan, and I'm going to hand it off to Sarah.
Thank you, Brianna. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Dalgleish, and I'm a program specialist with LIHEAP. Today, I'll be talking about aspects of the model plan that are unique to tribal grant recipients. Next slide, please. Although the model plan is a series of standardized sections, there are a number of distinctions between what is required of state grant recipients and what is required of tribal grant recipients. First, on the SF424 mandatory grant application form, there is a question asking the grant recipient to identify if it's a tribal entity. If so, the next question is whether it's a tribal consortium. If this is the case, the model plan requests that documentation be uploaded to show that the individual member tribes agree to have the consortium provide LIHEAP assistance to its community members. This documentation must include at least one of the following items. 1, a current state tribe agreement between their state and the consortium signed by the state chief executive officer, such as the governor or the delegate, and the consortium president. 2, a consortium letter listing the tribes signed by the elected tribal chief or president of each tribe in the consortium and signed by the consortium president. Or 3, a current resolution letter from each tribe in the consortium signed by the elected tribal chief or president of that tribe. Each resolution letter needs to state that the consortium has the tribe's permission to apply for and administer LIHEAP on their behalf and needs to designate a time period for that permission or until rescinded or revoked. Section 1, question 1.2 is asking, what percentages will the grant recipient contribute towards each program component, cooling, heating, weatherization, etc.? One of the program components is leveraging activities, which Brianna spoke about earlier. For tribal grant recipients, the limit that can be contributed towards this program component is 2%, is the greater of 2% or $100. This is different than what the states are allowed to contribute towards leveraging activities, which is the greater of 0.08% or $35,000. In the same question, there's also a differentiation in the administrative cost calculation for tribal grant recipients. The calculation is 20% of the first $20,000 of the annual award and 10% on any amount above $20,000. So for example, if the grant recipient is allotted $150,000 for their annual LIHEAP grant award, their total administrative cost cap is $17,000, which is calculated as 20% of $20,000, which is $4,000, plus 10% of the remaining $130,000, which is $13,000. So 4,000 plus 13,000 equals 17,000. Whereas a flat 10% would have only amounted to $15,000. Calculated this way, there's a small boost to tribes for the administrative costs. The next differentiation that we want to mention is in regards to weatherization in Section 5, Question 5.5. The question asks, under what rules do you administer LIHEAP weatherization? Generally, tribal grant recipients will select that they follow LIHEAP rules exclusively. This is because most tribal grant recipients are not directly funded Department of Energy weatherization grant recipients, so they don't have funding which is held to the Department of Energy rules. This provides an opportunity for tribal grant recipients to develop their own rules for the use of LIHEAP weatherization funds. Next, in Section 8 of the model plan, this section is in regard to agency designation and is not required for tribal grant recipients to complete. Continuing to Section 11, Question 11.1, which asks grant recipients to identify the ways in which they obtain input from the public in the development of their LIHEAP plan. One of the options listed is a public hearing. This is a requirement of state grant recipients, but not tribal grant recipients. There are many other ways of getting the public's feedback and input on the model plan, and we ask that tribes identify all of the other ways that they do that. But again, a public hearing is not required in the case of tribal grant recipients. Next is Section 16. This is another section that is not required for tribal grant recipients to complete. It is about performance measures, which is not required for tribes at this time. And finally, Section 20. Section 20 is a certification regarding lobbying. This certification is not required for the tribal grant recipients to complete. I will now hand it over to Drew to discuss fiscal administration.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Sarah. My name is Andrew Germain. I am the Fiscal Operations and Accountability Branch Chief within the Division of Energy Assistance. So we're going to spend a little bit of time diving a little bit deeper into some of the fiscal elements of the model plan, some of the changes that you've seen here. It's very possible that, many of you in some of our larger state organizations and tribes may defer to your fiscal staff for a lot of the information that's required of the plan, but it is important to kind of know some of the ins and outs of what we're asking. And I think it's important too for program staff and fiscal staff to be, in lockstep with some of the definitions and requirements of the plan. So we'll try and keep it as high level as possible, just to be as clear as possible. I also just want to say before we start on that, we are loving all of the questions in the chat. So we really appreciate everybody using the Q&A function, not the chat, excuse me, the Q&A function to ask questions. Our team is working hard to get those answered. So we can go ahead to the first fiscal slide. Thank you. So I just wanted to touch briefly on basically, most of what we'll discuss on the fiscal side is Section 10, which is program, fiscal monitoring, and audit. And there's a few changes that you'll see on the plan this year, specifically in Section 10.1A, related to the key fiscal terms that are required. So, if many of you, if you've ever been through, a monitoring engagement with the Office of Community Services, these are some of the definitions that we ask about when we're on site. So you can see in the screenshot there, we ask for your definition of obligation, expenditures, expenditure time frame, and administrative costs. This is a little bit of a new piece to the plan than in prior years. And so what we're looking to see is making sure that those definitions listed in the plan, are clear and can be easily understood and are really compliant with, not only the federal law, which really does defer to states, but is compliant with your own policies and procedures surrounding your own funding. So how you administer funding from other sources or from your state legislature, things like that. I just want to note that these definitions, while we're asking that they are documented in the plan, they should be documented in your policies and procedures. So again, if we were to conduct a monitoring engagement or a separate audit from another entity, whatever is listed in the model plan should match what's written in your policies and procedures. As Sarah kind of touched on with the administrative costs for tribes, as well as, administrative costs for states and territories, we want to make sure that that definition, allows you as the grant recipient to spend within the administrative cap listed in the plan. So 10% for most of you. And then we do get a lot of questions about just the definition of obligation. Ultimately, we do defer to your state rules. We do defer to your own internal definition, but this is generally a commitment of funding in a specific amount to a specific entity as of a specific date. All grant recipients have different definitions of obligation. We just want to make sure that your definition is obviously compliant with any large umbrella federal rules and regulations, but also mirrors what you're doing with your own state funding. State rules, you can be more stringent than the federal rules with your funding, but you cannot be less stringent with LIHEAP funding. So we can't have a separate, less stringent definition for obligation and expenditure for LIHEAP as compared to other funds. Next slide, please. The next few sections within section 10 of the LIHEAP model plan, section 10.2, 10.3, and 10.4, go into the different audits or reviews that you may be subject to. And there's kind of two sections that I consider to be important. The audits that you as the grant recipient may be subject to, and then the audits of the local administering agencies or subgranting agencies, and how that ties into the plan. So the very first thing is we're going to ask about the Single Audit Act, or the OMB Circular A-133. These were actually superseded a few years back by 2 CFR Part 200 Subpart F. But the requirement's the same. If you'd receive $750,000 in federal funds or more, you are required to have a single audit. I know at least for our state agencies, this is not a new thing. And so the model plan requires, reporting on material weaknesses associated with that single audit, but also material weaknesses from any audit from the prior year. So that could be an OIG audit, a GAO audit. You could be your state auditor's office. There's a lot of different, reviews that can occur over the course of a year. So making sure that that is reported and up to date. And then on the local agency side, our annual single audits required for your subgrant recipients or local administering agencies. This would be a question that you should be, able to answer for all of your local agencies, depending on the amount of funding they receive. Are you monitoring those local agencies? Is another state organization monitoring those local agencies, and how often? And then are there other requirements that you impose on your local agencies as it pertains to annual audits or annual reviews? Next slide, please. And then the last thing we'll kind of cover here, and this is going to be section 10.5 through 10.9 in the model plan, does relate to that compliance monitoring component that you as the grant recipient are responsible for. So looking for some very specific information here on, what kind of reviews do you conduct, how often, how it happens, is it virtual, is it not virtual, and then ultimately the frequency of that review and any specific items that you can attach to the plan. So, a couple of things to consider as you're kind of filling this part of the model plan out. Compliance monitoring should include a programmatic and fiscal component. So ultimately, this is one of those areas we love to see the program and fiscal staff work together. And that would include, conducting a risk assessment of your local administering agencies, and how those monitoring findings are being tracked, and ultimately, the coordination between all of the stakeholders to resolve those findings. One thing we want to point out here too as well, is to consider how you're ensuring payments to vendors are applied to the correct accounts. So more specifically, making sure that the benefits are being applied correctly, and then disconnection notices, are being avoided with LIHEAP funds when intended. These are all some things to consider when you're conducting your compliance monitoring of your subgrant recipients. And all of this can, you're welcome to attach your risk assessment to the plan. We do ask some kind of specific questions here, which is a little bit of change from the prior model plan, but ultimately, we just want to make sure that robust monitoring is occurring. And of course, as always, if you guys have any questions or concerns or just looking for some feedback, the program specialists and fiscal liaisons within OCS are always standing by to help out with that. So we appreciate you, making sure that this section is completed quite thorough. So I think that's it for fiscal, and I will turn it over to the next presenter.
Okay, thank you, Drew. And a big thank you to all of our DEA presenters today. Before we get into the Q&A, I just wanted to point out to everyone so that you're aware of the resources that we've included here. They're all organized by sections of the presentation, and all of these are live links. So once we've distributed the slides through our listserv, we invite you to visit any one of these links or any of the other resources on our LIHEAP website to get more details on our discussion here today, or any other LIHEAP program component that you'd like to learn more about. And with that, I will we'll move on to the question and answer session. And for that, we'll have Ms. Claudia Gonzalez to lead us.
Thanks so much, Vicki. I appreciate it. So now we're moving on to the Q&A portion, as Vicki mentioned. I have been trying to answer some of the questions from the Q&A box, and I believe that there are no pending questions at the moment. The most frequently asked question has been if this is recorded, and again, yes, it will be, and it will be posted at a later time. Are there any other questions that folks want to drop into the box right now so that we could do a live discussion question? If not, you can make note of those so that you can send them on to your program specialist after the webinar so that they can help address those separately. The Q&A box is open. Again, if you have any questions, please do drop them in there so that we can have a discussion about anything that might be pending. For those of you that are not able to see the Q&A box, there were some questions about benefit matrices that I provided a response to, and the question was if the general public, if the general public should be able to understand the benefit matrices that come through, given the fact that they are predetermined by mathematical formulas with constants and adjusters that aren't exactly common knowledge to customers. And so when we say that the benefit matrix should be understood and usable by the general public, we mean that they should be able to look at your benefit matrix and be able to find the circumstances that apply to them, such as their household size, their energy usage, and their source of energy and their burden of energy. And using those three components, they should somehow be able to see the approximate amount of benefit that they should be receiving. And if you feel like this is not something that your benefit matrix can do at the moment, you should definitely feel free to reach out again to your program specialist, and they could help you fine tune your benefit matrix so that it is in compliance with the rules for LIHEAP. And I see Akam is, oh no, he's not typing away to this. There is a question that came through about the model plan being available in OLDC. This date is pending because the form is being filled out in OLDC and it's being built within the system. And so as soon as that is being done and Grant Solutions lets us know that the form is done, we will make sure to send out, I believe, a dear colleague letter letting everyone know that that will be open and ready for your use. If you do need a template to work off of, just so that you're not, spending your time last minute trying to formulate the model plan, you can use the template that Nancy dropped in the chat, and it will be essentially what the model plan looks like so that you'll be able to use that as your reference and then fill in the model plan later on when it is available on OLDC.
Sure. Claudia, these are really good questions, and I think we answered most of them. At this point, we don't have any open questions, I believe, but I wanted to just clarify something or add on about the OLDC status. It looks pretty good. I mean, so far I know that the programmers are building the new form in OLDC. The best outlook I have right now is that that form should be available in the system within the next few weeks. And as soon as we have some confidence with the form, after we go through our own testing phase, we'll make an announcement. But again, the form should be available shortly.
Thank you, Ikam. And while I have you here, there is a question that came through that I think you'd be able to help us with. There is a question regarding the cloning feature for the plan. Are they going to be able to clone the plan from the previous year with the new form?
Yes, so the answer is no. I said yes is not the answer. Unfortunately for this year, the answer is no. And because we had to go through section by section changes, we heard this from the programmer that it will be not possible to start the form from by cloning it from last year. However, once the form is built in OLDC, in other words, once our grant recipient type up all the questions and save it, and then submit, they should be able to make any future adjustment without retyping the plan. And then next year, we are really hoping that the cloning feature will come back to us because we're not expecting any substantive changes for next year. And that's one of the reasons we made the model plan form template available in Microsoft Word. We believe that that form will help our grant recipient to go through their internal drafting, approval, and public hearing process. So when we test the model plan form, one thing we will ensure that our grant recipients can copy and paste responses to each section that they have built already in their own internal form. But again, once we see that, we should be able to explain that. But again, unfortunately, the cloning feature will not be available in fiscal year 2025.
Great, thank you for that, Ikam. Let's see. The other comment in there was just saying that the reference materials here were really helpful, which makes us really happy. That is, the point of all of this webinar preparation is that we want to give you all the tools that you need to make the best informed decisions for your plan in the new fiscal year. Is there any other questions that we can address at the moment? Please, again, feel free to drop them into the Q&A box, which can be found right to the left of the chat box.
Claudia, it looks like we might be able to finish early, but we don't want to wrap it up. We just wanted to give our attendees a few more minutes, maybe a couple of more minutes to see if they have any questions through the chat line. And as you know that we budgeted 90 minutes for this webinar, but it looks like we might be able to give some time back to everyone. The other important thing, you already mentioned this, is that if our grant recipients have any questions, they should reach out to their program specialist. And as you know, operations branch is really looking forward to this year's process so that all of our grant recipients are as ready as possible before the deadline comes on to us on September 3rd.
Awesome. I did have one more question that came in and I was typing up an answer, but I could just briefly give an answer verbally. And it asked if grant recipients are required to publish the benefit matrix so that the public can see it. And so typically the benefit matrix is published alongside your model plan, and your model plan should be made available to all the customers that you serve. So it's going to be a yes for that question. And we did have another question about when the model plan will be available in OLDC. That is a pending date. We don't have a set timeline for that yet. However, we do know that the form is being built in OLDC. And if you do need a template to reference so that you can start working on your model plan proactively, please do use the model plan template that was dropped into the chat. That is a really useful tool that you can, again, use to start formulating your plan before it's available in OLDC. And okay, I see Doris is addressing a question there. Thanks so much, Doris. And I do see a question here about the ADA compliance of the model plan template. Akam, could you speak to that a bit? Do you know if that's something that the model plan template comes with?
I can't answer that question right now, but I promise I will discuss this with our programmers and give a response back.
Right.
So far, I know that the ADA standard applies to federal documents, and then also many states have their own accessibility standards. So I don't want to answer it right now because we want to make sure that I have a solid answer.
Angie, if you could follow up with your, or if you want to drop your private email to the chat somehow, that way we can follow up with you afterwards. Or if you'd like, you can also send a reminder email to your program specialist, just so we have your contact so we can address your question at a later time. All right, we're getting some more questions in. Okay, we did have a comment that's asked for the template to be emailed out because there's some issues with the chat. This is definitely something that could be done. We could try to maybe, Akam, I don't know if you want to perhaps do a listserv email, if that's something that we could do, or we could do individual emails. I don't know. There's a process that we could put in place for that.
Sure. Yeah, I think we made the links available, but for whatever reason, if someone is not able to download the form from our website, Nancy already posted the links on the chat line. We can definitely email. Do we have an email address?
Say that again?
No, I was just saying that if we have the email address of the person, we can easily email it to that individual.
Okay, for sure.
And Nancy has made the link available through the chat line, but maybe it's just a phone call that someone is listening through the phone line and not able to see the chat.
Yeah,
line.
I believe that's what the case was. I believe it was joined online. And I believe Ms. Rebecca Carter is actually one of the grant recipients that I oversee. So that, Rebecca, that's something I can definitely get over to you by end of day today.
That's a nice TNTA.
That's a good point. Thanks, Akam.
Yes. Do you want
Ms.
to?
Sock, yeah, that's a good point. Please follow up with your program specialist and they'll be able to provide you further clarification about your benefit matrix and what it might need that you might need to add or change to make it compliant.
That's true.
And so with that, if there's no more questions, I will pass it on to Akam so that he could wrap up our webinar. I did want to just mention again, if any questions were left pending after this and that you were still curious, please feel free to send them over to our team and we'll do our best to address them and get you squared away.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you so much, the DEA team, for putting this webinar together. Thank you so much for attending this long webinar. And I hope that we were able to touch upon some of the important points that will help you in crafting a better model plan this year. As Claudia mentioned, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to us. And again, we will make this recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint slide available. Just wanted to go back to Vicky's point earlier that all of these links are live links. So once you receive the PowerPoint, you should be able to reach out to all of those links through our website. But also those who know more about our website, you will see that most of these links were taken from our website or the LIHEAP Clearinghouse or the LIHEAP Performance Management website. These three websites host most of our documents that we use for LIHEAP TNTA. With that, I would like to close it out, and thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. Looking forward to your participation.